So, based on what's written there, what is today's topic?
About the disparity?
Yeah, it's about, basically, it's about demographic groups and cyber technology. So it's about things like race and gender, and how those tie in with technology, both in terms of tech companies, and also access to tech, and also use of tech, and also the way tech applies to different people of different groups.
But this is philosophy, though, Professor. That's just a data set. You gotta.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry. We'll talk about the importance of it.
Analyze it.
Yeah. So let's just start here. To begin with anything, you need some facts, though, to talk about. So let's just look right off the bat. This is pure guesswork gameplay. Let's just play like Price is Right style. You guess numbers. So let's start with the United States. Can anyone guess what the percentage of women in the United States is by census data? Okay, I think this is the 2017 numbers. So this is how many residents of the United States are women.
All I know is that the white is the majority.
So yeah, so this is true. This is greater than 50%.
Yeah.
Does anyone? So actually, you want to guess on any of these numbers? This isn't working at Google. This is just within the United States. Overall U.S. resident population according to the census. Anyone have a guess?
I say women like 40%.
40 to 43-ish.
I think it's around 57, 53.
So I think as of this, it's 53 is pretty close. It's like 50.9%. Anyone know why women are higher than men? Anyone know? Simple answer, women on average live longer. Just a matter of fact that the average age for women is higher than men. So it's just the population numbers are slightly more women because you have slightly more old women than you have old men. But in terms of birth and everything, it's 50-50 plus intersex. So we're like,
rate.
yeah, so yeah, women just live longer. So if you're a woman, you're probably going to live slightly longer than a man would. Now that's no guarantee, but that's the way it works. All right, anyone know, there's actually two numbers for, oh, I deleted one of them. So this is white, non-Latin X. Anyone have a guess? What percentage of American residents are like just like white without any Latinx heritage? Anyone know? Any guesses? We are correct. It is above 50%. I will say that.
60.
Yeah, it's basically 60%. We're at 60.4. Black. Anyone know?
12.
As the newest one, very close. It's 13.4.
Yeah.
So very close.
I kind of seen some of these statistics before. That's
Yeah.
why.
What about Latinx?
Like 7.
It's actually these days higher than the black population. It's 18.3
Oh yeah, that makes
because
sense.
of large numbers of Latin American immigrants. And then Asian in the United States. Anyone know? And I don't know technically how the definition is included here. And this is one of the great things about demographics is we have all of these demographics and they were clearly written by, white people, and therefore like all of the entirety of Asia, despite the fact that it's like over half the world's population, gets thrown into one category, which is about as sloppy demographic decisions as it comes. But the number that's given
Actually, I'm sorry to cut you off. I thought that the Asian population would have been 18.
Yeah, so and here's another thing to take in mind is this is for the United States as a whole. And one thing to remember is that New York City's numbers are so much different from the population as a whole. Like if you go to certain parts of the country, you will just be like shocked by the difference in demographics.
Yeah.
Like I remember like the first time I went to parts of like the Midwest where it's just like, oh my God, everybody is blonde. I've never seen so much blonde hair in my life, and like it was just like shocking to me.
Right.
So yeah, these are the U.S. demographic numbers, and again, I'm not sure if by Asian this just means East Asian or if this is also including South Asian and Southeast Asian, because these numbers aren't fully adding up to 100.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna ask you. So like, there's supposed to be like some type of other or something?
Yeah, there's also like an other and a mix, and this is a problem with, how many of you have ever filled out one of those damn bubble sheets on a test, where you had to say, what are you, and you looked at it and you were just like, this is dumb and I have no idea what to fill out. Because that's not a problem which this part of Americans don't have trouble with that, but a good number of people do, because like, what do you do if you are, it is possible to be both white and African American. Like, that is true, because you could have had parents who were white who lived in South Africa and moved here. And then you like get this bubble sheet and you're just like, I have no idea what to do. Like, I remember the first time I was taught as a kid, like, always say African American, it's the polite way of doing it. And then I got to writing a paper about Nelson Mandela and had no idea what to do. Because it was like, because it's like, well, am I supposed to be quote unquote polite and call Nelson Mandela African American? He was not American. He's African, but he's black. And I was just like, woo! So that's the trials and tribulations of a confused, trying to be politically correct, like 14-year-old white kid in the suburbs. So that, yeah. All right, so these are the numbers this is the population as a whole. Now, let's jump over to the Google ones. Anyone have a guess on what percentage of Google's employees are women?
0.
12 to 13-ish.
12 to 13. You're actually close if you turn 13 around. It's 31%.
Oh, no.
But within higher positions, so like executive positions, it drops to 20. What percentage of Google's employees, and these numbers have changed slightly, so these are the 2017s. Anyone have a guess on white?
All I can say is that Asian is the majority one.
It's actually not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's white is the majority, but the white number as of 2014 it was 61% white, which is about this. But 2017 the number drops to 53.1.
Makes sense.
And then we can do Asian in Google is the next biggest number. As of 2017 it's 36.3. And then
Black has to be the least.
anyone have a guess on black or Latinx?
Just combine the last 2 percentages by half.
5%.
Yeah, so basically, black is 2.5 and Latinx is 3.6.
Woo!
And I left out the mixed race categories because that's just such like a grab all bag. All right, so here's, as Mo said, these are just numbers. This is just factual data about the United States and our demographic numbers and Google and their employee numbers. This is all it is facts. The question is what? What question comes up at this point?
Well, probably 2 questions. Like, one, where are the Native Americans? You know, but seriously, like, where's the disparity? Oh, is there a disparity?
Yeah, so here's the question, like, if you randomly put everyone in America, if we decided who worked where entirely by grabbing numbers, like it's just like a pure sample size, you just picked employees to work for Google out of a hat, these numbers would be the same as these numbers, just on a large enough scale. Maybe you get unlucky, but generally on a large enough scale, you just randomly pick people out, and these numbers would be the same. But they're not the same. Clearly, there are certain groups that exist in the United States at a higher percentage than they exist in Google, others that exist at a much lower percentage. So the question is, so higher, lower, 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 about the same. So what comes up? What is the question? There are a few different ones. So what are some questions that pop into your head? And besides the questions of like, what group would person from place X fall into? Because again, anytime you do a demographic thing like this, it's messy. Judy.
Does stereotype play in terms of the cybersecurity jobs for women?
So yeah, here's one question. It's just why? Why is it like this? If there's over 50% of the population are women, then why are less than 50% of Google employees women? And why even lower of a percentage once you get up into like CEO and big roles? So that's one question. It's just why is it like this?
And there's an answer to that.
So we'll come to the answers in a second. What are some other questions you might ask at this point?
Oh,
Either one of you. Take your choice.
okay, so do women earn like same equal wage as the men earn in terms of US demographics and Google?
Yeah, so here's another question, is we can ask some like underlying questions of are women and men making the same amount? But before we get into like detailed questions, what's just another one? Like really big picture question.
Is there a correlation between demographic size and Google employee demographic? You know, I guess you were kind of hinting at it earlier, but like, is there actual correlation, like, or is it just about, you know, stereotypes? Because like, if the Asians are 5.9% of the demographic, then how could they have such a large role in Google, like that means that technically Google is for Asian people.
Yeah, so here's the thing to ask is, this is more on like the details of why. So why is it like this? And tied in, and the question I'm looking for here is like the obvious one, which I'm sure all of you are thinking, is just like the question of like, so what? Or what does this matter? Or does this matter? Or what should we think about it? Should we look at these numbers? Like if I told you like the average height in this class was 2 inches taller than the American average, what would your response be? Like what is the appropriate response to my telling you this? Yes, so, like, okay, that's a fact, who really cares, like, that's a fun fact, haha, like, how nice. Or like, when I told you a couple classes ago that Thomas Jefferson invented the swivel chair, which is true, what's the correct response to that? Okay, so what? So here's the question, when you look at these Google statistics, do you look at this and just go, okay, that's a fact, so what? Or do you say, wait a second, is this a problem? And the fact is that we see both of these answers are on the board, and it's not a simple answer, and it's complicated. So really the two things we're going to talk about really are, there's really two ways of looking at answering this other question of like, is this a problem? Is this a problem? And there's two parts to answering is it a problem. And if we go back to a few classes back, way back, we had Kant and we had utilitarians. Utilitarians said things are bad when what?
It doesn't promote the most amount of good.
So when it doesn't produce the most good, or we're specifically talking about the things that, it's a C word. Something's good when it has the best consequences. So one way we could go about answering this question is, does the fact that we have these demographic differences, does it lead to bad consequences? So we could look at this and say, is this a problem? Well, we have to look at what the consequences are. And then the other one, what did a Kantian say makes something good or bad? It's not about what happens afterwards, it's what?
If you could maximize its, if you could maximize it, it'd be everybody making it universal.
Yeah, so it's about universalness, and it's about what happens when. It's not about what you do after or what happens from your actions, it's about what?
The action itself.
The action itself, and specifically what led to that action happening. So why is it okay to, or why isn't it okay to murder? Well, you think, if I'm murdering this person, am I treating them as worthy of living, or am I treating them just as a goal for myself? Am I treating everyone equally? So the other side is you ask yourself, so we could look at the consequences, or we can look at the, I guess a fancier way of saying it is the causes. And are the causes that led us to this point good? So basically, when you look at this demographic, there's two ways of deciding. You can either look at this and say, this is fine, because what led us to this point was totally fair, and the fact that these demographics are different than this, not a problem. So for instance, if you look at the NBA, what is the fact about NBA players in general?
All the players are black.
There are racial differences, but also, more so than that, what is the most common thing that's characterized of NBA players? Height. They're very tall. And when you look at the NBA, do you look at those players and go, man, it's so not fair that the tall guys are in the NBA? Exactly. There's a sense in which, no, the reason all the tall guys are in the NBA is because that's the way that you are good at basketball. Being tall helps. So we look at it and go, oh, the things that led to all the tall guys, that's okay. And you know what else? The consequences of having tall people is okay too, because the more tall people you have in the NBA, the better the games are. That's just a fact of the matter. So we look at this and we say, okay, there's a demographic difference. NBA players are a lot taller than the average person, but that's okay, because the things that led us here, namely that they were better at basketball, and the consequences of it, namely that we have better basketball games to watch, are okay. So the question is, are these Google numbers like that? Or are Google numbers like other things? Things in which there's a clear issue on hand. And you can look at things, you can come up with cases in which you look at it and you're like, oh, the thing that led us to this point, that was screwed up. And that's a problem. And also, the fact that it's like this now is leading to even more problems. So that's really what I want to talk about, is just use this as our background today and talk about, is this a problem? And then at the end we can do a, and what the hell do we do about it sort of thing. So is everyone on board with what we're talking about?
So you want us to actually talk about these numbers, or you just want to talk about it in general?
Both.
Okay.
But these are kind of the way in.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the numbers aren't nearly as interesting as the things that led to these numbers and the problems that are coming because we see numbers like this and because of the processes that led to these. You can kind of think of it as the same things that lead to these numbers lead to a lot of other issues having to do with race and tech. So these aren't really the main focus. It's more that these are just like a useful number-based way of looking and saying like, oh yeah, this right here is a major difference in American population. And this right here is a major difference. Like, these numbers are basically the same, like the same number of white people that exist, like the same percentage are working in tech. But if you are black, and you just like arbitrarily were to pick like one person out of America, the odds that they'd be working at Google would be so much lower if you're selecting a black person, which is just a statistical fact, and you're just like, well, what is the significance of this? What do we do about it?
Like, I mean, personally, I think like you can't look at these like two pieces of data unless there is an actual correlation. Like, it'd be pointless if there was no real correlation. Like, if you couldn't prove it either. But if you could like clearly see there's some type of correlation, then I think it is a problem, because that's when you know that you have to analyze the analytics like more closely. Like.
So let's look at this. Let's actually go through, and for the rest of this class, let's just look at what could possibly cause this? What could lead to these problems? That's all we're going to talk about. So first off, let's just talk about race first, and then we can talk about gender second. Basically, just first off, let's do some boring definition stuff. And this one's surprisingly much more difficult than you'd think. I'm just going to erase these numbers now because now they're just taking up board space. If anyone wants them, they're going away. But you can find them on the census and on Google's internal reports. What do we mean by race? Let's just do them both. What do we mean by race and what do we mean by gender? And not just examples. I mean, what on earth are we talking about? And this is a surprisingly hard question to answer.
I mean, this is my opinion. Okay, so you don't have to agree with me. But I think that race and gender are both the same in terms of being social constructs that society uses to classify individuals, like for the it's not really physical, but their attributes, and
So what do we mean by a social construct? Does anyone know what this means? Like, what is a social construct? So there are things in the world that exist.
I was gonna say like a type of social hierarchy.
Yeah, so it's tied in with social hierarchy, where it's kind of, and the key word here is social. So these are things, like there are things that exist in the world, that we all agree exist out there in the world. Some of these things would continue to exist even if every human being just died and stopped living. There are other things, though, that only exist because they exist in a society. And if our society were to collapse, these very ideas would disappear. And so, what are some examples then of things that aren't social constructs? Before we get to social constructs, just some things that even if all human beings stopped existing and we had no societies, these things would live on or continue to exist. Granted, there'd be no one here who was a human to talk about them, but they would still be here in some important sense. Any takers? No.
Well, some things that are not social constructs is just, like actual things, like actual physical things that exist in the world and would exist only in themselves, not because somebody, somebody created it, but it created something that would have existed if somebody else created it too. Like,
here's a really nice case: Iraq. Not like the country Iraq. I mean like literally a stone that you pick up on the ground. If every human being stopped existing, would this stone still be here? Yeah, it's a stone. It would have chemical properties, it would have physical properties, it would just be the way it is.
Or like another way to say it is like the actual name of the stone itself is like a social contract. Like,
yeah.
We agree in society that it's a stone because that's what it's called. But what it actually is, the physical aspect of it, is the thing that's not social constructed,
Yeah.
or socially constructed.
Yeah, so that's the way to think of these, is physical things that would exist and things that would be true even if human beings stopped existing. So other things like squirrels, like we wouldn't call them squirrels and they wouldn't be able to like bother us, but they would still exist and hop around and do squirrely things. Oxygen. It's not like we think about oxygen and it comes into existence. It's just oxygen. However, there are other things that only exist within the context of a society. And if our society collapsed, even if the physical stuff it's made out of were to still be there, it would stop being a thing. So what are some examples of this? What am I holding?
Dollar bill, yo.
This is 20. What is it? You can describe it in a few different ways.
Arbitrary.
So this is arbitrary in a certain sense of, this thing right here is a physical piece of paper, but that's not all it is.
The root of all evil.
It's the root of all evil.
Yeah, I agree.
But what
I agree.
fundamentally, if I were to take this out of my pocket, what word would I almost certainly use to describe it? Money, moolah, power, all of these things. What makes it the case that this is money? Can I dig up, if every human being died, how much value would this have?
$20.
Every human being died, it would be worthless. Yeah, it would be totally worthless. Why? What gives this value? The fact that we as a society agree that we will use it to have value. So it's not that there's anything special about this particular paper or about that guy on it or anything like. It's not like you see this and you're like, oh my God, my emotions are just so excited. It's rather that you know that if you give this to someone, they will give you other stuff in return. And if you work hard, somebody might give this to you. And if society collapsed, it would be worthless and no one would need anything. Like no one would have any point to money if the US government collapsed tomorrow. Like that's just the way it is. What are some other things that are socially constructed in this way? So you see, it's something which exists, but it only exists because we as a society have made it or constructed it or made it the case that it's a valuable piece of paper.
Once again, this is not my opinion, but it's been arguable that crime is a social construct.
Yeah, so there is a sense in which certain crimes are social constructs. So killing somebody, that is not a social construct. But murder is a social construct. If you had a society in which nobody punished you for killing people, murder wouldn't exist. The very idea of crime as a crime is socially constructed. Now the things you're doing, like if I run over there and I like steal somebody's computer and run out, like there's a physical fact that I took your thing and ran. But it's only a crime because we live in New York City where we have notions of property and other things. So property is another social construct, which we talked about a few classes back.
I was gonna say the government.
Yeah, the government is a social construct. In a sense, like a bunch of old people sitting around in a circle, that can be just a physical fact. But that we listen to them and they decide laws for us and then people come along and punish us because of it, or give us like how much money we have to give to them is decided by somebody else. Like anything government-based, sports teams, John Jay College, like the building itself is a physical thing, but that it's a college. If everyone in the country stopped treating your degree from this university as a degree, then it would cease to be worth anything. So that's what we're talking about with social constructs. So, what does it mean to say that race or gender are social constructs? And this is again going back to that thing of like, there's a dividing line between things that are just like physically true. Let's switch to a 1, so if I lose it, it's not a big deal. There are certain physical facts about this piece of paper. But the fact that it is money and I can use it for things is a social construct on top of that. So that's also what we can think of with race and gender. So with race, there are certain biological facts about human beings. We are different heights, we have different colored eyes, we have different parents, we have different skin tones.
Most of us.
We have different, well yeah, most of us. We have different like, there are things we all have in common too, generally. But generally, there are made, like, where we have hair growing out of. Like, all of these are differences between different human beings. The question is, though, what do we do with those individual physical differences? How do we treat them? And if you just say, like, everyone's different, end of story, that's just a biological fact. But if you start saying, because people look certain ways, they are